Welcome to your deep dive. We're going to dig into PNC's Q3 2024 earnings call today.
Earnings calls. Always so much to unpack. Tons of info, though. Hopefully we can pull out the important stuff, the stuff that really matters. For PNC and maybe even, the market as a whole.
So PNC's performance this past quarter, did they knock it out of the park or, well, strike out? And what's the game plan for the rest of the year?
Well, they're not exactly sitting on the sidelines, that's for sure. They reported $1.5 billion in net income, that is.
Wow.
And even more interesting, maybe they're projecting record net interest income by 2025.
Okay, so they're expecting big things.
Yeah.
But in this economy, how?
That's the thing. They're not even assuming a huge surge in loan activity. They're looking at other strategies to get there. Some pretty proactive moves, actually, like securing higher yields on their assets, particularly through what they call forward-starting swaps.
Forward-starting swaps.
Yeah, so essentially it allows them to lock in interest rates for future transactions. They're thinking ahead.
Smart. Getting ahead of those interest rates, however they might swing. But what about loan utilization rates? They're super low, right? I mean, even PNC called it befuddling.
Right. And you would think, with the economy in decent shape, you'd think businesses would be, eager to borrow.
Yeah.
So it's like, is this a temporary thing or a sign of something bigger, Are businesses being, ultra cautious? Or are there other ways to get funding these days? I don't know. It's an interesting question. And not just for PNC.
It really is. It's like trying to read the tea leaves, but the cup keeps changing. Speaking of uncertainty, what about commercial real estate?
Yeah, everyone's talking about that.
That's the big question mark, right?
PNC called it the, and I quote, early innings of the problem. So, they're definitely expecting more to come.
So how are they handling it?
Well, they're being cautious, especially with those big office buildings, the ones, with tons of tenants. They're also increasing their reserves, which tells me they're anticipating some losses down the road.
So battening down the hatches, but also it seems like they're planning to open more branches. Is that right?
Yeah, you caught that.
Seems a little, I don't know, counterintuitive in this digital age.
You'd think so, right? But it's all about location. They're targeting areas that are, really booming, especially in the Southwest. Their thinking is, even if deposit rates are a little lower in those areas, the growth potential makes it worth it.
So they're playing the long game. Interesting.
Exactly. They're thinking long term. And while other banks are, on these buying sprees, snatching up smaller companies left and right,
Right.
PNC's like, nah, we're good. They're not seeing the value right now.
Interesting. So they're sticking to their guns, focusing on what they do best.
And their performance this quarter seems to be working for them.
All right, so we've got impressive profit, that curious take on loan activity, and cautious optimism about commercial real estate. Let's unpack that organic growth strategy a bit more. Those new branches, for instance. Are they brilliant or are they like a step backward?
Well, they're definitely not just throwing darts at a map. They've done their homework. It's all about strategy. They're targeting specific areas with strong growth potential. They want to be where the action is, And especially, it's about building a physical presence in markets they think are going to be major players down the line.
So they're like planting their flag.
Yeah.
Staking their claim.
Exactly. And I think what they're going for here, it's not just about, having a branch on the corner. It's about building relationships face to face, especially in those growing markets. I mean, that personal touch can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's about trust.
Yeah.
Showing those local businesses and customers that they're there. They're invested in the community.
Right. It's a different approach, that's for sure, especially in this, increasingly digital world.
For sure. But sometimes maybe the old ways are still relevant.
Maybe so. But let's get back to those numbers. Net interest income. It was up this quarter, right?
Yeah, it was 3%, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
Those forward-starting swaps seem to be doing the trick.
Definitely. It all goes back to what we were talking about earlier. PNC saw those interest rates moving, and they made some strategic decisions that are, paying off.
Smart planning. And they're anticipating their deposit cost to at least stabilize, if not actually go down a bit. Right.
That's what they're saying. And it makes sense. With rates being cut, they've got a lot more flexibility to adjust what they're paying out, especially on those commercial deposits.
Which are, as we know, very sensitive to those rate changes.
Exactly. So they're really managing both sides of the equation, which is smart. Maximizing their returns on one end and strategically managing those costs on the other.
Absolutely. They're firing on all cylinders. And what about fees? Didn't those jump up this quarter too?
10%.
Wow. Okay, so what's driving that?
Primarily, it's their capital markets and advisory businesses. It seems like everyone and their brother is looking for advice on mergers and acquisitions. PNC is right there to help them navigate it all.
They've become the go-to people for businesses trying to make big moves in a, let's face it, pretty unpredictable business environment.
That's a good way to put it.
But, and I'm just remembering this from the call, I don't think they're expecting this level of fee-based revenue to continue next quarter, are they?
No, you're right. They were pretty upfront about that. It's tough to predict those capital market deals. They come and go. But I think it just shows that they're a valued partner, especially when things are complex.
It speaks volumes about their reputation, their expertise. Okay, so we've got strategic expansion, good returns, a healthy dose of fee revenue. But you know what we haven't talked about yet?
Expenses.
That's the one. Everyone wants to know, are they keeping those in check?
They are. Remember that continuous improvement program we mentioned earlier? They're serious about it. They want to streamline things, make everything more efficient. In fact, they actually bumped up their cost-cutting target for the year.
Oh, really? By how much?
It was at $425 million, but they've upped it to $450 million.
Wow, okay, so they're really serious about this.
They are. And it shows. Their operating leverage is a testament to that. For the third quarter in a row, they've achieved positive operating leverage, which means, in a nutshell, their revenue is growing faster than their expenses.
That's what you like to see. Investors love to see that. It shows they're using their resources wisely.
Absolutely. And they're on track to keep that positive operating leverage going for the whole year. It really speaks to their discipline, especially when you consider that a lot of banks are struggling with rising costs these days. It's tough out there.
It is. But PNC is what? They're like the steady ship in the middle of a storm?
I like that analogy. Yeah, they're riding the waves, but they're not letting the storm toss them around. They've got a plan, and they're sticking to it. They're facing the challenges head on.
Acknowledging the rough seas, but not letting it throw them off course.
Yep.
So we've got impressive financials, a unique approach to growth, and this real dedication to running a tight ship. But we can't forget about the big question mark looming over everything. Commercial real estate. It's a bit ominous, isn't it? Looming over everything. What were your impressions of PNC's take on it all?
They're not shying away from it, that's for sure. They know it's the big question mark right now.
As they should. Everyone's worried about it.
Right, and they're acknowledging that. They're not pretending everything's rosy. They even increased those reserves, remember, for those potential losses. Especially, like we talked about before, those big office spaces, multi-tenant places.
Those seem to be the biggest concern, right? With more companies going remote or hybrid, it makes sense that they'd be the most vulnerable. But it sounds like PNC is trying to stay a step ahead,
Absolutely, they are. Increasing those reserves is huge. It shows they're not just crossing their fingers and hoping for the best.
Exactly. Actions speak louder than words, as they say. And their CEO did say that overall their credit quality is still strong.
Right, he did say that.
So they're being cautious, but not like hitting the panic button.
Exactly. It's a fine line, isn't it? But that seems to be their approach. Being aware of the risks, but also emphasizing the strengths.
Which makes sense. Don't bury your head in the sand, but also don't run for the hills at the first sign of trouble. So with commercial real estate, it's all about finding that balance.
I think so.
They're taking those calculated risks, just like with those interest rate swaps. Not just reacting, but really thinking it through.
It's refreshing, isn't it? They're being so transparent about it all, too, letting investors in on their thought process.
It builds trust, for sure. They're not just trying to weather the storm. They're like adjusting their sails,
I like that. That's a good way to put it.
They're not just along for the ride. They're making strategic decisions, taking calculated risks, and being open about it.
It's a good approach.
So as we wrap up our deep dive here, what's the main takeaway for our listeners? What should they remember from all of this?
PNC is showing that it's possible to thrive, even in a, let's be honest, kind of crazy environment. And they're doing it by being smart, being disciplined, and thinking long-term.
They're not afraid to make those big moves, those bold decisions, like with their branch expansion, while others are shying away from, that more traditional approach.
They're playing a different game, aren't they?
It's like they're playing chess while everyone's just playing checkers.
That's a great way to put it. They're playing the long game.
Exactly. Well, it's been great breaking all of this down with you. Always a pleasure.
You too. Until next time.